Hello and welcome back to part two of ancient India. Today we're going to look into the religions and empires of this ancient classical civilization of India. I'm Coach Bowman. Hopefully, you have your notes loaded and ready to go. So, off we go. There are two major religions that come out of this ancient civilization. The first is known as Hinduism, and the other is Buddhism. Again, these are two of the major world religions that we'll discuss throughout this year. We've already talked about Judaism a while ago, and today we're going to take a look at these two. So, looking at Hinduism, Hinduism comes from a combination of both um, Aryan and non Aryan beliefs. We talked about that in our last video presentation. And from there, it truly manipulates and influences Indian culture today. It has a huge impact on its society, and it is definitely a major world religion found throughout India and truly throughout the world. Um, Hinduism, when it was first created, definitely had reinforced the thought and the concept of the caste system, which we discussed in our last presentation of how a society is broken into certain groupings. I'm not going to use the word class because that's something a little bit different. Caste, um, again, caste means you cannot move as a set grouping. So just try to remember that from our last video presentation, and you'll see how it works with this religion of Hinduism. So, what are the major characteristics? They believe in multiple gods, but they believe that these gods come from one major deity. Because of the vast amount of gods, Hinduism can be seen as a polytheistic view. Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva are some of those major deities found in Hinduism. Another concept of Hinduism is the idea of reincarnation. There to the bottom right, you see a good diagram of what reincarnation looks like. And the definition is the rebirth of one's soul. So, a person is born with a soul. When they die, that soul is reborn into someone else, and they carry on that same soul. And so reincarnation is something that is in Hinduism is based on karma, which we'll take a look at here in a few minutes. But also, let me get this little guy off of here so y'all can see um, the fact that it allows you to move up and down the caste system to reach the uh, final goal of what's called moksha in Hinduism. So, when we talk about reincarnation, you can move up if you have good karma, you can move down if you have bad karma. So, what is this karma in which I speak? Good question. I'm glad you are asking because here it is. It is the thoughts and actions that will result in consequences. The example I like to use in class is good karma, helping grandma cross the street. Bad karma will be pushing grandma into the street. So your actions and deeds in this life determines the future of your soul when it is reborn. And then again, looking back at the caste system, if you have good actions, good deeds, good thoughts in this life, you should have an uptick, if you will, in the caste system. And likewise, if you don't have those good thoughts and deeds, you have some bad stuff going on. Your soul would be reincarnated into something lower. This will include things like animals as well as insects. So there are some sects and groupings of Hinduism that believe in not harming any animals at all, including insects. So it's a very fascinating concept. In Hinduism, there are two holy books or holy texts, and those are the Vedas and Upanishads. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, or at least I have been pronouncing it that way for the past 16 years. So hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. And as far as Hinduism goes, it primarily stays within India. There are some traces of it spreading beyond, but primarily found in India today. So that's it for Hinduism, and let's look into Buddhism. With Buddhism, we're going to start talking about a guy named Siddhartha Gautama or Gautama. He was born in Nepal as a prince, very wealthy family. However, he had this burning desire to find out why we are suffering, and he would leave the royal family, the royal life, the high life, if you will, and set out on this quest to find out why we suffer. And in doing so, and through meditation, as you see here in this sketching, painting, whatever you have here, he will become known as Buddha, the Enlightened One. And it's through this meditation, he does figure out why we humans, in a nutshell, do suffer. And it's from that concept where we get the creation of another world religion of Buddhism. So there's a look at where Nepal is. In our other PowerPoint, we looked and talked about India. So we're talking about pretty much right in the Himalayan mountains over here. So again, there's a little map there for you to understand where Nepal is. Again, where Buddhism began. So what are some characteristics of Buddhism? Again, we do have a founder. Unlike Hinduism, there is not a specific founder. Again, remember, Hinduism is a blend of beliefs, whereas here in Buddhism, we have a founder. Like Judaism, one person. Again, this one is Siddhartha Gautama. And in his meditation, he discovered the Four Noble Truths. And again, this is why we suffer. Number one is everybody suffers. No matter who you are, no matter how rich you are, everyone suffers. We suffer because we desire things. We want things. It could be to be successful in school. It could be to have a good job. And so these desires will truly determine why we suffer. In his meditation, he discovered that we can end the suffering by ending the desires. Kind of sounds a little bit of common sense there, but to end these desires, again, we have to end, that would end our suffering. And that was something that was a huge mind-blowing concept. And then the last of the four truths are that we have to follow the Eightfold Path. And again, it's something that Siddhartha comes up with during this meditative state that he was in. To achieve the ultimate goal, Siddhartha believed in reincarnation. He was born into Hinduism, so there are some concepts of Hinduism found in Buddhism, and this is one that they do share, the idea of reincarnation. And that ultimate goal in Buddhism is nirvana. The way I remember the Nirvana is with Buddhism is because back in the 90s, Nirvana was a grunge band. And so the idea of be with Buddhism and be with band. So that's what I do for those. So what exactly is the Eightfold Path? It's 8 things that a Buddhist should try to achieve within their lifetime. And I'm not going to go through all 8, but here they are. Give you a second to look over it. Again, please pause the video if you need to write these down in your or type these down in your notes. and there's a nice little sketching that we see there. So again, the Eightfold Path is a major part of Buddhism. They will be able to achieve nirvana once these 8 steps or these 8 concepts have been achieved. So, again, nirvana is the release from suffering, from that ultimate suffering, from the idea of being reincarnated. So, that is the ultimate goal for nirvana. So, how does Buddhism spread to become one of the major world religions? Um, Eventually, we're going to be talking about a guy named Asoka Maurya. Sometimes it's spelled with an H, so you might see it as Ashoka. Either way, it's the same individual. Ahsoka is going to be sending out missionaries. A missionary is a person that spreads religion. Maybe some of you have gone on mission trips with your youth group from church. I did when I was in high school. I had a really good time doing that. But these missionaries will go throughout the Mauryan Empire to spread Buddhism. So that's one of the major reasons why. Another reason would be trade on the Silk Road. The Silk Road is a trade route that stretches from the Mediterranean Sea all the way to China. We will discuss that route a little bit later on in the year, but it is a huge trade route that crosses the entire continent of Asia. So it makes total sense as to why this religion spreads quickly throughout Asia. Once it starts taking hold in other places outside of India, there's going to be new styles or something called sects that will be created. And that is Theravada, which is a more traditional view of Buddhism. And that's typical of what you would see with monks and nuns of Buddhism. You've seen any type of National Geographic shows with monks that have shaved their heads and have devoted their life of poverty and wearing orange robes. That would be a Buddhist monk. Um, you also have the group of Buddhism known as Mahayana. That is a little bit more of an easier style of Buddhism, more for the everyday individual to try and reach nirvana. So here's a nice little map showing Buddhism today throughout the world. As you can see, there are several throughout, with a larger population going to be in Laos, Vietnam, China. You notice there's very little percentage in India, but you have a larger population in Mongolia, South Korea, and as well as Japan, which, as you can see, are where it does reach eventually. So that's all for the religions, and we will continue on with our 2 major empires of ancient India. The Mauryan Empire, which was created by a gentleman known as Chandragupta Maurya, and he decides to go beyond the Indus Valley and actually includes the Ganges. So if you think about the benefits of living on the river, multiply that by 2 rivers. So he will definitely have plenty of rich topsoil for farms to create his empire. As you can see there, this is a map of what he starts with. Eventually, his grandson will expand further south, which we'll talk about here in a few seconds. His grandson is Ahsoka. Ashoka, again, as I mentioned before, is another way you might see it. But he goes and expands his empire south. And as you can see by this little comic there to the right, it was not done in a peaceful manner. The grandson of Chandragupta Maurya, Ashoka, expands his empire south and is very brutal, very destructive, and eventually will control most of India at the end of his conquest. So, one of the things I have my students try to remember is that the Mauryan dynasty has most of India. After Ashoka's death, the dynasty will fall to a rebellion, and especially in the southern portion, causing the Mauryan dynasty to fall. This is a pattern that you're going to see throughout world history, where you have a very strong leader who conquers a lot of land, and once that individual dies, his predecessor, the ruler after him, cannot maintain it, and it does fall apart. So, again, this is a pattern that you'll see, and I'll bring up multiple times throughout this course this year. And so there's a map of what the Mauryan dynasty or empire looked like at its high point. As you can see, controlled most of India except for the island of Sri Lanka, which is that little teardrop in the very tip of the subcontinent of India. So, what are your major contributions? Well, number one, as we talked about earlier, Ahsoka does spread Buddhism, so you have a huge, massive amount of conversion to Buddhism, including Ahsoka himself. So that's kind of the reason why he decides to spread it. And again, the trade routes help make that a lot easier. I believe it's probably more than likely because of all the destruction that he caused that he decides to build free hospitals throughout his empire. Makes sense. My personal opinion is a little too late for that one, but you've destroyed a lot of people's lives by conquering most of India. But here's your free hospital. So that I guess is trying to fix broken fences, if you will. He also creates free veterinary clinics as well, and try to improve roads. Excuse me. Roads will become a very important part of empire building, which we'll see also throughout this course. So the other empire is the Gupta Empire, and the Gupta Empire comes out of the ashes of the Mauryan. It comes to power once the Mauryan collapses, and the Gupta Empire is very interesting. I try and get my students to remember the gap between the rivers. If you can remember Gupta and the gap between the rivers, you will remember that the Gupta Empire stayed only in the northern part of India. I think they learned from history of not to try and conquering other people, and in turn, their empire was a very peaceful, productive empire. As you can see, their map of their highest point of ruling and expansion, again, staying in the north, the gap between the Indus and the Ganges rivers, or you can say the gap between the Hindu Kush and Himalayan mountains. So, as we talked about a few seconds ago, the fact that the Gupta Empire had a very peaceful, was very prosperous. They had a lot of achievements during this time period, and this is what historians would call a golden age. Um, Golden age, think about what happens with gold when you put it in the sunlight, it shines. So whenever you hear that an empire or a dynasty has reached a golden age, there's a lot of good things that come about in a golden age. So there's a lot of little clues there to help you remember that. So, what are the contributions, and why was this empire so great? Well, first of all, you don't have a lot of war, you don't have a lot of conflict. So, you can start focusing on academics, particularly in math. The concept of zero was a breakthrough that came during this time period. So, a number that represents nothing. Big difference between $10 bill and a $100 bill is a difference between a zero. So, we are grateful for that concept. In the medical field, the idea of setting a broken bone would lead to a major breakthrough, as people are able to actually use their broken limbs and appendages once they are set. So I myself broke my arm when I was 7 years old, jumping out of a swing, and they had to set my arm before they put it into a cast. So kind of relate to that one. In astronomy, the idea that the Earth was round, it was something that a lot of people think about Columbus and Galileo, but it truly came from the Gupta Empire first. So, again, major breakthrough there. The idea of cotton was something that came through. It's a lighter material. It's easier to grow. You can use it for a lot of different things. Besides clothing. So a very good material, very good textile that was brought out of India. And last but not least, a piece of literature known as Mahabharata, one of the longest poems to be written during the Gupta Empire, and it is definitely a book that shows um, why the Gupta Empire was at its golden age. That is it for India. Next time that you tune in, we will be looking into China and the Persian Empire as we then conclude the quarter with our unit on ancient Greece. Thanks again for tuning in. Appreciate your time and stay safe. And I'll talk to you next time.